Never in my life would I have really considered myself a confident person. I had strawman confidence in my own mind growing up to resemble the loud, boisterous person who's able to hold court in a large group of people, make everybody laugh. And yeah, those are elements of confidence, but it was a very shallow idea that I had in my head. And only now at 24 do I really think that I'm beginning to come into some form of self-confidence. To use the Big Five personality scale that people like Jordan Peterson are very fond of, I would assess myself as someone who's pretty moderately high in neuroticism, fairly introverted. So one thing I really struggled with was the fact that this conception of confidence as being associated with loud, boisterous people didn't seem like something that could ever come naturally to me. And indeed it doesn't. But maturing, one of the things that I might think about that conception of confidence right now is, might not necessarily be the traits of a confident person that I just described. That same person could be very uncomfortable in a one-on-one interaction, for example, something that might be actually anathema to their inherent personality traits. So we need to get a little bit more detailed in our conception of confidence, right? What is confidence? It's hard to say. Is confidence a lack of self-doubt? Well, it could be, but the problem is you don't ever want to have such little self-doubt that you become arrogant or self-assured, in which case you're pretty much just digging your own grave. In my life, I think that what confidence has really amounted to, at least and especially at this point in my life, is coming to terms with my own personality and owning that. And it might sound a little bit cliche to say, be yourself or own your own personality. But to actually see the fruits of what that has done in my own personal life, I can attest that that is huge. I am someone who, by nature of insecurities that I've struggled with throughout my life, have always tried emulating people who I perceived to be confident. Whether this is a movie character whose personality I'm trying on to try and come off as more confident or more likable in a social setting, or whether it's, trying to adopt the personality traits of my brother who's really good at making people laugh. But what this inevitably comes down to is no matter how well any of these individual traits or characteristics work for someone, you will never have as much success as they do in trying to implement them because it's not what comes natural to you. And people in my life have tried to tell me this before. Even my own brother, who I mentioned, told me at one point, don't try to be me, be you, be JJ. And I think I understood conceptually what he meant, but it took a long time for me to actually start living it. And again, at 24 years of age, I can only now say that I'm coming to a place where I'm starting to live that. If you've seen my memoir series, you know that one of the wise sayings that my platoon commander gave was to be a first-hand you and not a second-hand someone else, because you'll burn yourself out quick trying to put on a front. The wisdom of that saying cannot be overstated. No matter how well any rhetoric or joke or pattern of interaction works for any individual person, that does not guarantee that it'll work for you, especially if that does not come naturally to you. So what have I found? Well, owning your own personality traits and your own tendencies gives you a level of confidence in the same way that speaking the unspoken gives you a level of confidence. Here's an example of that. I recently had a conversation with my boss, who happens to be very naturally assertive, very naturally argumentative, able to state his own case. A little bit more on the extroverted side, definitely more on the assertive side. Once again, to use the Big Five terminology. Someone who is very much comfortable being loud, pushing back against other people, all of which are the opposite of myself. Pushing back against people and asserting my own viewpoint has been something that I've had to become more comfortable with as my life has progressed, given that I'm naturally very agreeable. This is something that I was expressing to him. And it got to the point where I was able to confidently assert, almost paradoxically, I was able to confidently assert that I have trouble sometimes confidently asserting my own position, as well as struggling with the temptation to people please. And owning this and understanding that it comes with its own set of pros and cons, just like any other personality trait, gives you a level of confidence when interacting with people. There was something powerful about coming to terms with that. And you might say, well, what are the pros of that? Because people pleasing is something that obviously often has negative connotations when it's being discussed. People who are agreeable tend to be very good at establishing rapport with people and building relationships. And that's something that I have found to be very effective in my own life and in my own work. Paying attention to people, listening to people, taking into account what their legitimate needs are and fighting on their behalf. These are all things that will build you great relationships with people. And they're things that if you understand yourself as a more agreeable person, again, not to make this video just about being agreeable, understanding the pros and cons of your own personality enables you to capitalize on them. But if you had caught me 3-4 years prior to this, I might have said that it's an incredible weakness to be a people pleaser. It's an incredible weakness to be naturally agreeable. Again, naivete, a lack of understanding the scope of these things and what their actual application is. When I was younger, like especially in my late teens, early adulthood, I desperately wanted to have some of these traits that I perceived as confident: loudness, extroversion, ability to make large groups laugh, ability to crowd control, ability to be disagreeable, right? In the military, in the Marine Corps, especially on the officer side, you're surrounded by a lot of people who have chosen this career route because they happen to be high achieving, disagreeable, competitive people. And so that resulted in a ginormous culture shock for me, whereby I was really hard on myself because I was surrounded by all of these hyper competitive, hyper disagreeable people. And because I didn't really understand personality dynamics too well, I really judged myself for not being that way. I thought there was some inherent flaw in my being, something deeply wrong with me that prevented me from being as comfortable being loud and being assertive. And mind you, loudness and assertiveness are things that can be learned. There's a natural charisma and a natural attractiveness that people have when they understand themselves and are unapologetic about who they are. This does not mean being a dick if you're someone who's naturally disagreeable, right? You should still be a good person. You should still strive to be polite to people. However, understanding your personality and making no efforts to pretend to be someone you're not, specifically as a method of people pleasing or reputation gaining, gives you an aura. And it gives you the aura of someone who's secure in themselves. This is something I'm only just beginning to realize. And how do you achieve that, right? Is it as simple as waking up one day and realizing that you just got to own who you are? Kind of. I will say in my case, it was not a black and white split-second moment that characterized my shift into a more confident lifestyle. Not that I would even say at this point that I'm an incredibly confident person. However, putting myself in a position like the military, where I'm interacting with people on a day-to-day basis, and where you have leadership responsibilities, in the wise words of Captain, forces you not to put on a front. Sooner or later, if you want to be effective socially, if you want to be effective in your life, you have to learn how to leverage your own strengths, your own personality, and be unapologetic, because your strengths are someone else's weaknesses and somebody else's weaknesses are your strengths. So rather than focusing on what you perceive to be your own shortfalls, recognize that there are, as a result of the fact that everything in life is a dichotomy, strengths and pros on the flip side of those weaknesses that will enable you to fill gaps that perhaps some other people might not be able to. Some of these things are self-imposed. Some of them you don't know how close you are to overcoming if you just put in a little bit of time. I didn't used to know how to throw a football. And this was a big source of insecurity for me. At 24 years of age, I've only just taught myself how to throw a football, just as a result of taking a day to actually focus on it. Throw after throw, something I had never in my life dedicated time to. And I was able to figure it out. And I know this is a message that I could have benefited from hearing 4 years ago. Chris Williamson once said, at best, you can be the second best Joe Rogan. This is so true. At the best, you can be the second best Chris Williamson. Do not take the easy route of attempting to photocopy things that you see work well in someone else's life. You have inbuilt strengths, whether or not you've realized them. To use a different person's terminology, David Goggins has talked about the personal equation. When you find this equation, you become a mathematical genius. Every person has a different personal equation. By all means, learn from people. Learn knowledge from people, learn bits of wisdom from people, but do not attempt to be other people. There's no need for that. They already exist. What doesn't exist yet is the fully actualized version of yourself, which you could attain as a result of owning who you are and focusing on the things that you can control, the little things that you know you can improve on day by day. Not trying on other people's personalities, not trying to be something that you're not putting on a facade. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested, you might want to consider checking out my memoir series, as I mentioned, which covers very similar themes and ideas to those in this video. And stick around.